Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at Who Moved My Cheese?
Mm.
It's a book that I think a lot of people have heard of. Maybe they even read it back in school.
Oh, yeah.
But it's one of those that I think is worth revisiting, especially for, anyone who's going through changes in their life.
Hmm.
And I think that's all of us at any given time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's deceptively simple, but it's really profound when you kind of dig into the metaphors.
So we're going to be looking specifically at the book Who Moved My Cheese?
Mm-hmm.
Not just like summaries of it.
Yeah.
I think it's always worth going back to the source material and really seeing what's in there.
Yeah. You can glean a lot more.
Exactly. So I guess to start out, the book uses this metaphor of cheese
Right.
and the maze. So what does that represent?
Well, the cheese, I mean, it can be anything that you want in life, right? It's success, it's happiness, security, it's whatever you're looking for, your goals.
Okay.
And the maze is like the where you're looking for it. So your job, your relationships, your community.
Even, I guess sometimes the maze could be in your own mind.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Your own thought patterns and habits.
So it's really universally relatable
Yeah.
because everybody's got their cheese and everybody's in some kind of maze.
Right.
So then we meet these characters. We've got Sniff, Scurry, Hem, and Haw.
Yes.
So who are these guys?
Well, you've got the mice, Sniff and Scurry. They kind of just represent like a very simple instinctual way of approaching the world. They're all about action. They just do.
Okay.
And then you've got Hem and Haw, who are these little people. They're a little bit more complex. They think a lot. They have a lot of emotions. And that can sometimes get in the way of them finding what they're looking for.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because it's almost like these characters represent different parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
Like, I know there's definitely been times when I've been like super gung-ho about something.
Right.
Like I'm just ready to go. I've got all this energy. That's my Sniff and Scurry. But then there's also been times when I'm like, oh, but what if this happens? Or, but what if that happens? And I get stuck.
Absolutely. We all have those moments. We all have that kind of hem and haw in us, I think, where we kind of get in our own way sometimes.
Totally. So then, of course, the central event in this story is the cheese disappears.
Right.
From Cheese Station C, I think that's what it's called.
Yes.
So how do the characters react to this?
Well, Sniff and Scurry, again, very simple. The cheese is gone.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go find some new cheese.
They don't overthink it.
Nope.
They just go.
They just start running through the maze.
They're like, well, that's life, right?
Yeah.
Things change. You got to adapt.
But Hem and Haw, they're a little bit different.
Yeah, they're not too happy about this. They're freaking out. Who moved my cheese?
Right.
Like, they're complaining. They're blaming each other. They're stuck in this kind of like victim mentality.
So how do they eventually get unstuck? Or do they?
That's what we're going to be looking at, right?
It's
So
really great at.
we're going to dig into that. I know at least one of them gets unstuck.
Yes, one of them does.
And I think that's the really kind of hopeful part of this story.
Yeah, definitely. It gives us a way forward.
Yeah.
Even when we feel lost and confused.
So, yeah, like when that cheese disappears for us,
Right.
how can we be more like Sniff and Scurry?
Yeah.
Or at least how can we learn from Haw,
Right. Exactly.
who eventually figures things out?
Yeah, and that's what makes the book so powerful is that it's not just about like identifying the problem. It gives us actual strategies for dealing with change.
We're going to get into all that in just a minute. But first, I think we need to take a quick break.
All right. So we're back and we've been talking about who moved my cheese and how these characters, really embody different ways that we deal with change in our lives.
Right.
But I think one of the most important things about the book is it doesn't just leave us with like, oh, well, there's these different personality types and some people are better at change than others. It actually gives us some tools. Yeah, it's a really practical book. I mean, it lays out like these steps that we can take to move with the cheese.
Right. So what are some of those steps? Like what can we learn from Haw's journey specifically? Because he's the one who starts out kind of stuck, but then he figures things out.
Yeah, so I think one of the first things is to just acknowledge the change. Like really admit to yourself, okay, things are different now. The cheese has moved.
It sounds simple, but I think that's actually really hard for a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's like we want to pretend that things haven't changed or that maybe they'll go back to the way they were.
Like if we just ignore it long enough, it'll fix itself.
Right. Exactly. But, the book makes a point that like the longer you stay in that denial, the harder it becomes to actually adapt.
It's like when you stay in a job that you hate,
Oh, yeah.
and you're like, oh, but I've been here for so long, but you're miserable.
Yeah, you're just kind of like delaying the inevitable, right? You're going to have to face that change at some point.
So acknowledge the change.
Yeah.
What's next?
Okay, so then once you've kind of like ripped off the Band-Aid and you're like, all right, things are different now, you have to confront your fear. What are you actually afraid of? Like, why are you resisting this change?
Oh, that's a good one.
Oh,
Because, yeah, fear is a big part of it.
yeah, huge. And it can be all sorts of things, right? It can be fear of the unknown, fear of failure, fear of what other people will think.
Like, even with this podcast, when we decided to change the format, I remember it was like, oh my gosh, but what if people hate it?
Right.
What if I lose all my listeners?
Totally. And that's natural to have those fears. But the book encourages us to kind of like question those fears. Like, is it really as bad as you think it is?
Yeah. And sometimes just like naming the fear can take away some of its power.
Oh, absolutely. You know, once you can like articulate it and see it for what it is, it's not as scary anymore.
Okay. So acknowledge the change, confront your fear, and then what's next?
Then you got to visualize success, like really picture yourself thriving in this new situation.
Okay. So this is where the new cheese comes in, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the book emphasizes that it doesn't have to be like this super specific, detailed picture. It's more about like the feeling. Like, how do you want to feel in this new situation?
Like when Hamina imagines himself like feasting on all these different kinds of cheese.
Yeah. And he's like happy and relaxed and he's got all this abundance. And I think that's a really important part of it is like focusing on the positive.
Okay.
Not just like what you're afraid of, but what you're actually moving towards.
So it's not enough to just run away from the old cheese.
Yeah.
You have to have some kind of vision for the new cheese.
Right. Because otherwise you're just going to be wandering around the maze aimlessly.
Okay, so we've got acknowledge the change, confront the fear, visualize the new cheese. What else?
Okay. And then this is the big one. Take action. Nothing's going to change unless you actually do something.
Right, you got to move.
Exactly. You can't just sit around and wait for the cheese to come back to you. You have to be willing to go out and explore and experiment, try new things.
Like Sniff and Scurry, they just start running through the maze, right?
Yeah, they don't overthink it. They're just like, okay, let's go find some new cheese.
And even though Haas struggles at first, he eventually does take that first step.
Right. And that's the key, is just like taking that first step. It doesn't have to be this huge leap. It can be something small.
And I think that's encouraging because it makes it seem like, okay, change is possible even for people who are like naturally resistant to it.
Right. It's a process. You don't have to do it all at once.
Okay, so we've talked about these stunts for moving with the cheese, but change can be like this ongoing thing, right?
Yeah.
It's not like you just do these things once and then you're done.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. It's like a constant process of adapting and adjusting. And I think the book emphasizes the importance of like staying vigilant, don't get complacent.
It's like even once you find new cheese, you can't just like sit back and relax and assume it's going to be there forever.
No, because the cheese is always moving. You know the world is always changing. So you got to keep your senses sharp.
Like smell the cheese off and, right. That's one of the things that Ha writes on the wall.
Exactly. Pay attention. Notice the subtle changes in your environment. Be willing to adapt when you need to.
And I think that's a really good reminder for all of us because it's easy to get comfortable.
Oh, yeah, totally. We get into our routines and we kind of like stop paying attention.
And then suddenly the cheese is gone. And we're like, wait, what happened?
Right. So, yeah, stay vigilant. And then another thing is to celebrate your successes, even the small ones.
Oh, yeah, because I think when you're going through change, it's easy to focus on like what's hard or what you're still struggling with.
Right. You're like, oh, I'm not there yet. But it's important to acknowledge like how far you've come.
And like give yourself credit for the progress you've made.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because that can help you stay motivated and keep moving forward.
So it's not just about like enduring change. It's about like actually enjoying the process.
Yeah. And like seeing it as an opportunity for growth and learning.
So really, Who Moved My Cheese is about so much more than just like finding a new job or whatever. It's about like developing this whole mindset.
Absolutely. It's about like becoming more adaptable and resilient and like embracing change as a natural part of life.
And I think that's something that we can all benefit from no matter what our cheese is or what maze we're in.
Definitely. It's a timeless message. And I think that's why the book has resonated with so many people for so long.
Okay, so we're back. And we've been really digging into this idea of moving with the cheese. You know, like how do we actually adapt when things change?
Right.
But I think what's really interesting about Who Moved My Cheese is it's not just about like abstract concepts.
Yeah.
It's about these characters.
Right.
and how they each represent a different way of approaching change.
Absolutely. And I think by looking at them individually, we can kind of see ourselves.
Yeah, like which character are you?
Right.
Exactly.
So let's start with Sniff.
Okay.
He's the one who's always kind of like sniffing out change early on.
Right. He's very aware, like he notices when the cheese pile's getting smaller or when it's starting to get old. So he's not in denial. He's not like surprised when the cheese disappears.
Nope. He's like already prepared. He's been paying attention.
And I think that's a really important lesson for us. Like in the real world, it's not always obvious when the cheese is starting to move.
Right. It can be subtle.
So we have to be paying attention. We have to be aware of what's going on around us.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that Sniff teaches us is like to stay informed, keep learning, be curious.
So that when things do change, we're not caught completely off guard.
Right. We're more adaptable.
Okay, so then we have Scurry. He's the one who, like, as soon as the cheese is gone, he's like, boom, I'm out of here.
Yeah, he's all about action. He doesn't waste time overthinking things.
He's like, okay, new cheese. Got to go find it.
Yep. He's just like running through the maze, exploring, trying new paths.
And I think there's a part of all of us that's like that. Like when
Yeah.
we're really excited about something, we just want to go for it.
Yeah, definitely. But I think sometimes we let our hem and haw get in the way.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Because he's like the opposite of Scurry.
Totally. He's resistant to change. He's scared. He doesn't want to leave his comfort zone.
He's like, but this is my cheese. I've always had this cheese.
Right. And he's blaming everyone else for the fact that the cheese is gone. He's not taking any responsibility.
And I think we've all been there. Like when something changes in our lives
Yeah.
and we just want to like dig in our heels and resist.
Absolutely. It's a natural reaction. But the book shows us that like that resistance is only going to make things harder in the long run.
So how do we overcome that hem in ourselves?
Well, that's where Haw comes in.
Right, because he starts out kind of like him. He's not happy about the change.
Yeah. He's complaining. He's scared. But eventually he realizes that he has to do something different.
And he starts to look for new cheese.
Right. And he goes through this whole process of like confronting his fears and visualizing success and taking action.
And it's not easy for him. He struggles. He makes mistakes. But he keeps going.
Yeah. And I think that's what's so inspiring about Haw is that he shows us that change is possible even for people who are like naturally resistant to it.
It's like he gives us hope.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, look, I was scared too, but I did it and you can too.
And I think that's really the message of Who Moved My Cheese.
It's that change is a part of life and we can either resist it or we can embrace it.
And when we embrace it, we open ourselves up to all sorts of new possibilities.
Right. New cheese.
New cheese. So if you're feeling
It's-
stuck, if you're going through a change and you don't know what to do,
Yeah.
read Who Moved My Cheese.
Mm-hmm.
It might just give you the insights you need.
Absolutely. It's a quick read, but it's packed with wisdom.
And it might just help you find your new cheese.
And savor the adventure along the way.
That's it for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.